The year is drawing to a close, so it's time to take a quick look back at the top 10 albums of 2024, with two honorable mentions, as they're, well, not entirely proper studio albums. You'll see what I mean. Let's dig in. I'm Andy, host of Poetic, a weekly music history series and audio podcast where I dig into the record collection I started building in the 1990s to uncover the history of songs, bands, and albums within. Both of my honorable mentions are actually pulled from Record Store Day 2024. And we first set our sights on Ramones and their release, the 1975 Sire Demos. Now, I love this as it's an early glimpse at the punk pioneers. 2024 was the 50th year since the band's formation, and this is a collection of their earliest recordings for Sire. Several tracks within would land on their 1976 debut, including 53rd and 3rd, Loudmouth, and I Don't Want to Walk Around With You, but it also includes a lot of rarities as well. With 2024, I call it the year that changed my mind about live albums. Looking back over the years, I've owned quite a few that are really just subpar, and they just haven't lived up to their studio counterpart. While I still prefer Fleet Fox's studio recordings over live on Boston Harbor, this triple album has genuine warmth to it that keeps it quite intriguing. Sputnik Music wrote that in assessing the 2010s as a decade, it's difficult to think of a folk act that enjoyed as much success or carried as much influence as Fleet Fox's. I'd agree, mostly from a personal standpoint, and so this record becomes one of nostalgia. We're given 2 hours of career-spanning favorites from the Pacific Northwest band. Next is X's, the third album from Cigarettes After Sex. When you have a debut as strong as that from Cigarettes After Sex in 2017, it's kind of hard to one-up it. And you see that with the subsequent studio releases by this band. Cry from 2019 and this year's X's. Now, it took a full 5 years for the band to pump out this album, and it's not a far stretch from the sleepy dream pop of their last two. Album of the Year gave it a somewhat scathing review, noting while comparing X's to the first two Cigarettes After Sex releases, and I agree with this album is no different. It's just some really horny, mindless dream pop / slowcore. There's not a lot of progression here that really goes out of the way to differentiate it from the other two. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if like me, you love their records. As Maximum Volume Music notes, the lyrics almost seemed like a cleansing stream of consciousness, with vocalist Greg Gonzalez lamenting about the loss of a near half-decade-long relationship. This is a deeply personal, intimate record that goes head-to-head with all music by Cigarettes After Sex. I see it not as a progression forward, but as a complement to the past. In that regard, it's nostalgic in more ways than one. 9 years after keyboardist Carrie Lander passed away due to cancer, and 11 since their last proper studio release, Camera Obscura has finally returned, with Look to the East, Look to the West. Here's a quote from Pitchfork. "It took years to fathom someone sitting in for Lander, in which time Campbell also had a child. But reuniting in 2019 at the behest of Bell and Sebastian was the most fitting rebirth. In 2001, Stuart Murdoch had produced Camera Obscura's debut, Biggest Bluest Hi-Fi, of which, I might add, we're still waiting on a reissue. While some disagree, in my mind, the two Scottish bands have often paired well together. Shy, twee-ish indie pop, laden on occasion with orchestral and chamber movements. Like their contemporary, Camera Obscura with Look to the East, Look to the West has progressed and matured. But so have I. 11 years will do that. There's a lot to love here. While Big Love gets the nod for most Spotify plays at 1.25 million thus far, my pick goes to opener Liberty Print. Beyond that, Camera Obscura gives us pop hook after pop hook. Up until this year, Big Thief has dominated my Spotify Wrapped. They're a band that has carried me through a lot, personally, so it's no surprise I'm drawn to their lead singer's solo work. Bright Future is a little bit different from Adrian Linker's past work, and Pitchfork highlights why. Recorded straight to tape with a small group of close confidants, the Big Thief Singer's latest solo album is free-flowing and intuitive, reveling in the space between spontaneity and impermanence. There's a lot packed in this album. It has 12 tracks, most stripped down and raw, including a rendition of Big Thief's Vampire Empire, which was released as a Big Thief single in 2023. Fool, Sadness is a Gift, and Ruined round out my other personal favorites. In one of the longest sentences ever, Anthony Fantano of The Needle Drop writes, "Since taking off, Adrienne really has yet to release a subpar album, and seemingly she is only getting better at what she does best, penning those wary, rusty, folksy tunes that sometimes have a country twist, that sometimes feature enchanting instrumental layers, that sometimes deliver profound observation on life itself, or sometimes feature devastatingly sad lyrics that feel like an atomic bomb going off in your heart." I fully agree with that statement, and in true Linker fashion, the biggest gut punch comes in album closer, Ruined, in which the frailty and heartache is laid bare for all to hear. The Smile, featuring Radiohead's Tom York and Johnny Greenwood, gave us 2 albums this year. Like many, their second, Cutouts, kind of fell flat for me. It lacked the depth and intrigue of Wall of Eyes. Channeling elements of jazz and prog and electronic music, The Smile continues down a fascinating path somewhat similar to the band two-thirds of the members share, yet so distinctly different that there's almost no comparison. I like this quote from Still Listening magazine. "Wall of Eyes is too cryptic to be apathetic, too funky to be downbeat, and too layered and haunting to be a simple FU to the system. Wall of Eyes may contain just 8 tracks, but I struggle to find one I really don't like. It's one of those rarities you can listen to without skipping over a single song and loving every moment of it, then returning back to the beginning and doing it again." GNX by Kendrick Lamar is gonna be a tricky one. Digitally, it's a 2024 album, dropping in late November as a surprise release, but physically, it won't hit until early 2025, so you may see it split some people's lists between the 2 years. I'm including it here, though, simply because it's just that good. Though it is his shortest album to date, it doesn't necessarily feel that way, and it still runs just shy of 45 minutes. According to Vulture, though no tracks from his recent feud with Drake are included, that sentiment still looms over the album. There are a lot of guest appearances here, many from underground artists, though SZA makes a few appearances as well. While some have noted it falls short of his past work, and maybe that's kind of true. I mean, I find it hard to top tracks like N95 off Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, and at least half of Damn, but there's a lot here to appreciate. Opener Whacked Out Murals, my personal favorite Man in the Garden, and Reincarnated, and I'm just starting to scratch the surface. Maybe I'm ranking this so high because it's just that fresh. I mean, it's only been out a handful of weeks at this point. Or maybe it truly does warrant a spot just outside the top 5 for 2024. Time will ultimately tell, but I'd love to know, what do you think? And here's a hint. GNX isn't the only surprise album on this list. Another is coming up in a few more in this countdown. As It Ever Was, So It Will Be Again, the brand new release by the Decemberists. Now, the moment I first heard Joan in the Garden, I knew the Decemberists' new album would be a bit different. The track harkens back to the band's earlier releases, those from the aughts, with a runtime just shy of 20 minutes and an experimental prog breakdown in the middle of the song. Joan in the Garden is a powerful track with multiple movements. This is something I've always loved about the Decemberists. Their songs aren't traditional. Look back at the 5-movement track, The Tane, or from The Crane Wife, The Island, which had 3 movements. But one song isn't telltale for the full album, so a deeper dig is needed. And the Decemberists live up to the task with catchy, intellectual folk rock tracks and melodic crooners pretty much all the way throughout. It opens with Burial Ground, a track that always reminds me of the Beach Boys' Sloop John B. off of Pet Sounds. Other favorites include The Reapers and the more folk-centric The Black Mariah and the lovelorn All I Want Is You. Now, I saw them perform at Ryman in Nashville this year, and it absolutely blew me away. Such a phenomenal show, and they played all of the songs I've mentioned here, including Joan in the Garden, which was absolutely mind-blowing. An easy top 5 for me is Romance by Fontaine's DC. In fact, I'm a little surprised it's not higher on this list, but there were some pretty stellar releases this year, especially rounding out the second half of the year. Romance strays a bit from the post-punk of the band's early days, even as recently as their 2022 album Skinty Fia. While I love their other albums, I do approve of this new direction and variation in style. It's catchy and filled with hooks. Perhaps a lone nod to their post-punk era is the opening title track, which is also one of my favorites on the record, but there's still plenty here to cherish. Early single Starburster made it to number 3 on my top played tracks on Spotify Wrapped, and as you dig deeper into the albums, others like closer favorite, Bug, my personal favorite, and In a Modern World solidify the album as a true winner. I agree with Album of the Year's review. While they've explored new soundscapes and ideas here, at its core, it's unmistakably a Fontaine's DC album. While Picky Bastards highlights something I didn't pick up on until reading it. When an album starts out with the line, "Into the Darkness Again," and then ends with the bubbly, shiny sound of a song about someone who is simply your favorite, it's difficult not to view the album as a journey from dark to light. Truly stunning. Rounding out the top 3 is Frog in Boiling Water. While I've enjoyed Dive over the years, they've never been a band I've obsessed over until now. Frog in Boiling Water blends elements of shoegaze, dream pop, indie rock, all with lush, reverb-laden guitar textures. Maybe part of it is that past albums, as Pitchfork notes, have been more concerned with inward darkness, the addiction and depression that dot the band's history. Yet dig into the lyrics of Fender on the Freeway, and in retrospect, there's a timely ring to them as we close out 2024. Systems fail and empires fall, vocalist Zachary Cole Smith sings. Now, I can't relate to the addiction and depression from past Dive albums, but oh boy can I relate to the dystopian, ripe social commentary scattered throughout Frog in Boiling Water. From technological complacency to the concept of, as the press materials note, coping with capitalism, this album goes as deep and dark as the swirling echo of guitars do. Perhaps more than past Dive releases, there's a foreboding nature to the instrumentation that harkens to shoegaze while also meeting the lyrics head on. I was sure this was going to top the list, and I think I said that in my mid-year countdown, but 2 records dropped in the second half of 2024 and beat it out. This brings us to Songs of a Lost World by The Cure. I've seen some call Songs of a Lost World, the 2024 album by The Cure, the best thing since their debut. Now, that's a bold statement. The band has been giving us releases since 1979's Three Imaginary Boys. And sure, it's been 16 years since their last new material, but it's still a bold statement. I get the appeal, though. I mean, Songs of a Lost World is truly phenomenal. Not since 1985's The Head on the Door has frontman Robert Smith composed an album for The Cure all on his own. Released November 1 of 2024, it's already hit some pretty notable milestones. The band's first album since 1992's Wish to hit number 1 in the UK. Not to mention reaching that spot in, let's do the countdown, Australia, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, Sweden, and Switzerland. It's one of the fastest selling albums of 2024 and, at one point, outsold the entire top 10 of that same week combined. But what about the music? Signature to The Cure's expansive 45-year career of releases, we again get some interesting dark gothic rock that they pair with traits of space rock and dare I say it, hints of dream pop and shoegaze. I'd say my personal favorites are the two opening tracks. First is Alone, which begins with a spacey, drawn-out instrumental opening, spanning just shy of the near 7-minute track's midpoint. Next is And Nothing Is Forever, which has some of the most powerful lyrics Robert Smith has ever written. Like Wall of Eyes by The Smile, this album includes just 8 tunes, and it's really hard to find a weak point. Smith and company have stripped it to the best of the best, avoiding any fluff or filler, so you get to sit in your sadness and wallow in its beauty for the entirety of the album's near 50-minute runtime. And, in fact, you'll probably flip it back to the A-side and start that 50 minutes all over again, because it is just that good. If my top songs on Spotify Wrapped was any indicator whatsoever, there's a clear number one album of 2024 in my book, No Name by Jack White. I was lucky enough to catch him at one of the secret shows when he swung through Dallas last month, and the performance did not disappoint. There's something a little different about this compared to the others that he's released under his own name. Well, let me say, under the name he's taken, at least. No Name seems more visceral and raw. It's a punch to the gut with intriguing, witty lyricism and White's signature stripped-down blues rock mashup. Released as a surprise album, there it is, surprise album, back in August, The Guardian highlighted what I picked up on as I compiled my 60-second album review. No Name is Jack White's most White Stripes-esque solo release. They continue by stating, why White chose to let his 6th studio album slip out in such a manner, tracks initially devoid of titles, is anyone's guess. But I mean, honestly, to me, it completely makes sense. The album is called No Name. It was released without anything on the sleeve, on the labels, as a secret album. Craftily slipped into customers' bags at Third Man Records when they made a purchase. And as for slipping out, I haven't seen many at all spotlight that the release is officially TMR 1000. So, the 1000th release by White's imprint Third Man Records. Maybe the wider physical pressings weren't yet complete to fit the schedule of releases, or maybe it was a clever deployment of an album suitable for the album's name. Who knows? Let's do a sub-countdown, Inception, if you will. Here are my top 5 songs off No Name. Number 5, Morning at Midnight. Number 4, That's How I'm Feeling, which seems to be a fan favorite. Number 3, opener, Old Scratch Blues. Number 2, What's the Rumpus? I freaking love that guitar solo. And number 1, with the wittiest lyrics, most clever lyrics of them all, Archbishop Harold Holmes. What were your top albums of 2024? What, in your opinion, is missing from my list? Let me know down in the comments below, and stay tuned. I'll be counting down my top 10 reissues on vinyl of 2024 very, very soon. And I'll be sharing my top spun records of the year come January as well. I'll see you next time.